Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, June the 4th in Victoria in the Memorial Arena. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. So we will start off with, my theme for the week is peace and quiet. And peace and quiet are important for humanity. It's important for humanness. Almost by accident, I have spent a little bit of time recently at a few places in town that are very, very quiet. And when you go to them, it's a different world. And I think it's a very important world. We may not want to be there 24 hours a day, but we better not lose touch with it. We can't lose touch with it because that's nature. That's where we come from. That's what we're part of. So, and peace and quiet are an important part of it. And, I don't think they want to allow us to have peace and quiet in the corporate industrial world that they're creating. So, for example, loud motorcycles. And I'm not talking about motorcycles, but I'm talking about loud motorcycles. What you might call noise bullies. And boom cars, some of them are the same. And a lot of people also say very loud buses in their neighborhood, probably tourist buses a bit, and those refrigerated trucks and things like that. I mean, those are complaints that a lot of people have, and just the general level of noise. So I contacted the police here about noise bylaws, and I was told that there is, the level is 91 decibels for, let's say, a motorcycle or a truck, something like that. So why don't the police then do something? That was why I contacted them. Why are these people allowed to just make noise? And so what I was told, I think I understood what I was told, was this. The only way for the police to get a conviction or to make it stand up in court is to ticket somebody, but then they have to test the machine. So they need mobile testers just like they have them for testing alcohol. But I think the legislation, and I think it's provincial, but I think it's provincial legislation. The provincial legislation does not allow the police to do roadside testing. So they can't do the roadside testing. The law is there, but the police are unable to enforce it. And if they just give somebody a ticket, it doesn't stand up in court. So this is this idea of the rules and regulations and the government and our rulers sanctioning the bullies. They always tell us we're against bullying, but really they aren't. They support the bully in many more ways. Fracking in people's neighborhoods, for example, is another one.
Yeah, and I mean, noise is a form of pollution, really. Over a certain level, there's lots of research that shows that causes higher stress levels in people, which then translates into higher rates of illness and discomfort. I mean, it is a public health issue, and there's no excuse for not having the ability to ticket somebody. I mean, sometimes a motorcycle will go roaring by and it lifts people right off their seats. If you're in a restaurant, people just, it's very shocking, and we're kind of used to it. But nevertheless, that does add a lot of stress to our lives, and it's totally unnecessary.
Yeah, so I always wondered why they allowed it, and now I know. Supposedly, I think I'm right, the law does not allow the police to test. So call Christy Clark, call your MLA, call your city politician. This is something we can do, and just tell them to stop sanctioning bad behavior that is, as Walter said, a public health hazard. And just let's tone our city down. I know the corporations, they don't want peace and quiet. It's the last thing they want. And it's up to us to take it, to fight for it and take it. Tiananmen Square, is that where we're going?
Tiananmen Square. Today is the 25th anniversary of the massacre in that square. It's the numbers in China. This occurred in China 25 years ago when there was a huge demonstration. Started out with student protests that escalated into the general population. Hundreds of thousands of people went to Beijing and sat in that square for weeks asking for government reforms,
Asking for democracy, really.
for
That's
democracy,
what they wanted.
and it ended up with a big crackdown, and they rolled through the square with the tanks. And it's hard to know its numbers of many people died, but between 500 and 5,000 from what I've been reading. It's so hard to know exactly, but it was a massacre. What I was trying to find out is get some background on the whole issue of what brought people to that point and everything. And what I stumbled upon was this relationship between how much business boomed in China and in the United States when they shifted a lot of their manufacturing base to China really effectively. After this incident, there's a lot of sort of
So it's almost like the first thing that had to happen is the government of China had
Show
to
us you can
show
crack
that
down.
you will crush democracy,
yeah.
and then we'll do business with you.
But there was a lot of rhetoric, like the Bush administration. This is George Bush
The first?
the second,
Second, okay.
and saying, oh, that they had to, there's all these diplomatic problems, and there was talk about sanctions and talk about this and that. But when the rubber hit the road, nothing really happened. They just basically let it settle down after a few months, and it was business as usual. And then they launched straight into this huge, almost it's one of the largest shifts of economic activity in the history of the world, where China became this massive manufacturing base, and the United States went into a steep decline. It destroyed the U.S. society, really.
And none of that had to happen.
No.
I mean, why, if you're the government of the United States, would you make rules
Yeah.
that say, yeah, you can take all of our jobs and move them to other countries around the world where the corporations who own our government here in Canada, the United States, those same corporations can pay them $1 an hour or 50 cents an hour in slave conditions.
Well, it's really a fascist
Yeah.
country. Really, it's very authoritarian. There's really no
Now, are you talking about Canada, the United States, or China?
Canada, United States, and China. But the thing, China really is the way that they've run the country. It's an incredible country to try to govern. I think it's over 1 billion people in China now. Incredibly volatile situation in China right now. Environmental issues, massive pollution, massive shifts of populations, climate change. We're talking just a real pot is boiling there.
But you know, I have real hope because China has a culture that goes back thousands
Yeah.
of years. And I really hope that they are the ones who, now that they're a very powerful nation, will be able to take this mess that we're in and try to move us in more positive directions. I hope that's what's going to happen.
I'm not optimistic, and I think we're going to see some bad things happening, particularly with because they're so tied in with the West. But the tap is running out over here. Consumers don't have money to buy Chinese products as much as they were hoping for, and they really did destroy our purchasing abilities because we don't have jobs here anymore like we used to.
Yeah, that's like one of the main points of the last 20 years is the loss of jobs in Canada and the United States is not by accident or because
No.
of some rule of nature. This was deliberately done with malice aforethought. They knew exactly what they're doing. They took the manufacturing jobs from North America and sent them overseas. I mean, that's what they did, and they means the corporations who run the country, the politicians who do their bidding, and the media who lies to us about what's going on. They did this to us, but we can take it back. We just
Yeah.
have to start today.
This is huge. I mean, there's a lot of things we could touch on, but I think that's the number one. The take-home lesson today is that what we're seeing in the media. Oh, by the way, they're talking about how in China it's a big clampdown. You can hardly find out about this. The general population hardly even knows about what happened. And this is a Western corporate media pointing at China for not being open in their reporting.
Yeah, I mean,
And you have to really laugh at that,
Yeah.
because they spun that from day one. We never really knew what was happening there through the media. And I think something entirely different than what was portrayed happened there.
well, here's an example of the way the media is used to keep us in the dark. In Seattle, the city of Seattle, the city government of Seattle has just passed some kind of rule or law or bylaw that the minimum wage in Seattle is going to be moving up to $15 an hour. To me, the most amazing thing about that particular story is that there hasn't been a word in the corporate media here. Like this, of course, has been going on for months. The city government just passed the law or bylaw or whatever it is a few days ago. I don't know the details. Some people want the big companies like McDonald's and all the fast food places to have to start paying it almost immediately, let's say within a few months or a year. Other people are fighting to keep, not have it happen for a few years. So I don't know what the details are. But $15 an hour minimum wage passed by the city of Seattle, and the story is that the idea is spreading around the United States. But not a word in our media, because the last thing they want us to know about or think about is that kind of a thing. And there are so many good things, so many good fights going on in the world. People are getting rid of genetically contaminated foods. In Germany, they're so far ahead of us in terms of solar energy and just so many things. But the media's job is to hide all of that from us and instead feed us crime, violence, sports, entertainment, nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's the whole destabilization model where if we don't feel secure in our jobs, in our society, we don't feel secure about what's happening overseas, all these different countries that are being stirred up, then it diminishes our ability to have a democracy, because we are basically tied into a war economy in the United States. So ultimately, you can't ignore the fact that half of the U.S. taxes are paid to the war machine, and I think that all comes down to those basic ideas of keeping things destabilized, and economically destabilized is a big part of it. There was another good story, Jack, about a restaurateur who decided to pay his workers a very good wage and not allow tipping.
That's right. That was here on the island.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah.
I should have looked more into that, but it's the same sort of idea where, you go to a restaurant, you sit in a nice restaurant, and you're having a nice meal. Why not pay the staff right up what they're worth and not rely on tipping, which can be manipulated and can be unfair. And then the workers have a living wage, and it's a great idea.
Yeah, so in Seattle, from what I read, a lot of small businesses are quite in favor of this because they think that people are going to have money to spend. And it's not small businesses that create jobs like we're always told. It's a prosperous society that creates jobs. And then small businesses can prosper. And they're not prospering now.
No, good point.
Teachers?
Well, we could talk about teachers a little bit. I mean, we were waiting for the announcement at 4 o'clock. The BC Labor Relations Board was discussing whether or not it was legal for the government to dock the teachers' pay 10% because of these rotating strikes, lockout scenarios. Very hard to understand the rationale. It doesn't look legal at all on the face of it, but the announcement hasn't come out, but it will be happening today. But the government looks a little bit desperate right now, Jack. Public opinion really generally is supporting teachers, although there are some, there are some places where you're going to still see some.
I really don't understand, which I guess I mentioned just about every week, why the BCTF, as one example of a union, but my own union, the BCGEU, is the same, why they always rely on the corporate media to tell the workers' story. Because the corporate media is owned by the corporations that hate unions. I mean, the way the media talks about unions sometimes is... But the unions have the financial ability to have their own media.
It's like an unwritten rule that you can't fundamentally challenge the corporate structure. You can only talk about what happens inside of it and unions and all that. But if you stepped outside of that structure and said, well, the corporations got their tax breaks back in the early 2000s, as you pointed out many times, several $1 billion a year ripped right out of the BC economy and stuffed into the pockets of the rich. We wouldn't be having this discussion about teachers had that not happened. I hear commentary every day. We just heard John Horgan on the radio talking about the teacher situation and supporting them, but not talking about the fundamentals of the injustice, only to talk within the scope that they're allowed to, basically, because you can't fundamentally challenge the system, because that
That's
would
right.
be
He
outside
didn't
the script.
challenge. He didn't challenge the
No.
idea that a lot of the biggest unions, HEU, for example, which represents thousands of the lower paid workers in our hospitals, just settled for something that's, I'm sure it's less than the cost of living. So in fact, they're taking another cut. The HEU, all those thousands and thousands
Yeah.
of working people who deserve better, I've just been hammered by this Liberal government, and I haven't really seen the NDP stand up and fight it, or the union for that matter. The union won't even fight it. Neither one will say, hey, Ms. Clark, Christie, your government has taken some $7 billion a year
Yeah.
out of the provincial treasury through tax cuts. Huge amounts of that have gone to the very top and richest people.
Yeah.
So maybe we should look at that, see what people want. Is that what we want? The banks, two of the banks just made $4 billion in profit together. Two banks, $4 billion in profit in the last 3 months. And that's what they report.
That's astonishing.
It is astonishing.
Because where does that money go?
And why isn't that front page news?
Well,
Why isn't that front page news?
it's not in the script, you see. And as long as we're not talking about those fundamentals on a daily basis, we're never going to figure out how to get out of this mess. We're always going to be tied up in the same processes over and over again. And it just goes to show, for instance, that party politics are a disaster in this province, and they're a disaster in Canada, where these parties tend to get away with so much now. Not only the governing party, but all the parties, and it's an attack on democracy, really.
Yeah, so what's happened over the years is that the people we elect simply cannot work for us or care for us, because they have to do what the party tells them to do. And the
Yeah.
leadership of the parties is often very corrupt and centered only on what's best for them. So we elect good people in many cases, but if they want to have a career, if they want to keep their job, they have to do what the party leadership tells them, or they're out. It's as simple as that. So it's up to us to take a look at our political system and change it so that it starts to work for us instead of for them.
For sure. I mean, you don't need political parties to have a legislature or a parliament. A friend talked to me today and just, pointed out that in British Columbia at one time there weren't political parties, and you'd get elected, you'd head down to the legislature, you'd sit in the legislature for 2 or 3 weeks and hash it out to see if they'd get enough agreement amongst them to form a government, and then they would go to the lieutenant governor and say, okay, look like we have enough people to form a government. That would be a great way to go, because they'd have to go and talk these issues out, find all the compromises that would work to be able to make legislation, and then form a government. That's a great way to go.
And we need the ability to have referendums on important issues when either the government is doing what we don't want, or
Yeah.
they're not doing what we do want. We've got to have the power to overrule them.
Yeah.
And it's got to be relatively easy. In Switzerland, people can trigger a referendum on virtually any federal legislation that comes through.
Yeah.
But it almost never happens because the government knows the people have the power, so they pass.
they try to make it work. Exactly.
And you're right what you said. It's these fundamental issues that are really the important things. We've
Yeah.
got to stop talking about the symptoms all the time. And
Yeah. Get down to the bottom line of what else is happening. I had a couple other things I thought we'd
Go for
touch
it.
on. I think you actually sent this to me was Desmond Tutu, the Desmond Tutu from South Africa that was a great friend of Nelson Mandela and was involved in that liberation struggle for decades, well respected. He visited Canada, and he called the tar sands in Alberta a product of negligence and greed. So that's a well-known worldwide figure, very prominent person saying the tar sands is a huge mistake. I think people should take note when people of this stature are making an effort to communicate to Canadians that they're in trouble with this here type of development. And also, by the way, huge Chinese connection in Alberta, right? Billions of dollars in investment in Alberta in the oil and gas industry. So that's something we should be thinking about, that this is not just a Canadian issue, it's a worldwide issue. And the last thing I had saw, and I don't know if you sent that to me, about the mobile phone subscriptions. Now, there's going to be more cell phone subscriptions in the world than there are people next year. That means, like, how many people are in the global population? Do you know?
7 billion, 8 billion.
So
there's going to be more subscriptions than there are.
Yeah, and about 65% of them are going to be these iPhones, the new high-tech gadgetry, right? But people don't realize that these devices are not green technology. They're massive energy hogs. And from what I read earlier, having a cell phone is equivalent to having a 1,000-watt baseboard heater on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So,
are you listening, awesome?
To support the system, the cell phone itself has a battery and stuff, but the network and the worldwide global network of handling this type of technology is putting a massive stress on generation of electricity globally,
yeah,
to keep up with these developments. So,
and plus the toxins that go into building them.
Well, all the other awful things about it. But the point I'd like to make is that this is not green technology. It's very, very damaging to the environment.
So along with our cars, we're going to have to give up our cell phones, or at least really, really, really reduce, but we're out of time.
Be nice and quiet though, Jack.
Yes.
Think how quiet it would be.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.